Something changed inside your brain this year. You didn't feel it happen. There was no headache, no dizziness, no moment where you thought that was it. That was the day. And until this July, the scientists who study this for a living did not know it happened either. Here's what we have all been told for most of our life. The brain you carry at 50 is the brain you will carry at 70, only slower, only dimmer, a little more worn at the edges. Decline in that telling is passive. It is weather. It arrives, you endure it. In July of 2026, a team of researchers published a study in the journal Science that does not fit that story at all anymore. They looked inside the human brain across the entire lifespan, 20 years old to 95. And they found that somewhere between 50 and 75, the brain does not simply run down. It does something active, something deliberate. It swaps out its own immune cells, not wears them out, not exhausts them, swaps them. It replaces them with cells that came from somewhere else entirely. And in the days since that paper landed, I have watched the coverage go by. And I have watched almost every account of it get the most important detail wrong. So we're going to do this properly. I want you to stay with me. Citizens, here's what your brain needs to know this week. I'm going to change that. Here's what your brain needs to know right now. I am Sean Smith, and this is Wealthy Nation, where we hold two things in one hand, your brain and your money, because they were never two separate objects. They are two pages of the same book. Now, today, we're on the brain page, and the ink is barely dry. Over the next few minutes, I am going to give you three things, what this study actually found, what it does not say, and I'm going to be very hard on that part, and what the person standing in the middle of that window does with the news. Nobody is selling you anything in this hour, including us. To feel the weight of what changed, you have to know what we believed before it. Your brain has its own immune system. That's incredible. Its own cleanup crew, its own first responders. They are called microglia. They patrol tissue. They clear away debris. They answer injury. For more than a decade, the settled understanding in neuroscience was this: those cells arrive before you were born. They form in the earliest weeks of development. They migrate into the brain. They take up their post, and then they stay for your whole life, renewing themselves quietly from within, never once bringing in help from the outside. That was the model, a closed system. Whatever showed up at the beginning was what you had at the end. And I want to be careful here because this is where a lesser channel would sneer. That model was not sloppy. It was not lazy. It came from careful, patient work, tracing the origins of cells in animal studies, done well, repeated, holding up under pressure for years. It was simply never tested this way. Not in a human brain, not across an entire lifespan, not one cell at a time, because doing that requires tissue from people at every age and tools that did not exist 10 years ago. So the question just sat there, unanswered. Not because anyone was hiding it, because nobody could reach it yet. This July, somebody reached it. Researchers led by Nathan Zemke and Bing Ren, publishing in the journal Science in July of 2026, went after the hippocampus. That is the structure most bound up in memory, holding on to a name, a root home, a conversation from an hour ago. They obtained tissue from 40 donors, every one of them neurologically healthy. No dementia diagnosis, no disease sitting there to explain anything away. Ages 20 to 95. And they did not study those brains in bulk. They read them one nucleus at a time, which genes were switched on and how the DNA was packaged, how the genome was folded in three dimensions. Here's what came back. Between the ages of 50 and 75. And I want you to sit with that range because it is not the range anybody expects. The original resident immune cells, the ones you were born with, were depleted. And in their place, cells carrying the signature of immune cells that circulated in the blood, different origin, different lineage, different history entirely, and a more inflammatory signature than the cells they took over from. That is the headline. But it was not the only thing moving inside that window. The three-dimensional folding of the genome eroded across cell types. Now stay with me, because that sounds abstract, and it is not. Picture a very long piece of string. At one end, a light bulb. At the other end, the switch that turns it on. Now you lay it out straight, those two ends are nowhere near each other. But fold the string the right way, and the switch comes to rest right up against the bulb. The fold is what turns the light on. That is your DNA. It is not a straight line. It is folded. And the folding is what lets a gene reach the switch that controls it. When the folding starts to go, the switch drifts away from the bulb. The instruction never arrives, and the light does not come on. At the same time, the cells that maintain the blood-brain barrier declined. That is the border. That is what decides what gets into the brain tissue and what stays out. And astrocytes drop sharply, including the ones that help regulate how neurons speak to each other. So 4 things in the same window in healthy people. The closed system was never closed. And the handoff happens in exactly the decades most of us are told to expect nothing in particular. Now here's the part I've not been able to stop thinking about. This discovery almost could not have been made, not because the tools were weak, because of what the researchers chose to measure. If you only look at which genes a cell is switching on today, you learn what that cell is doing. You do not learn where it came from. And these replacement cells were doing broadly similar work. On activity alone, they blend right in. But there's a second layer, chemical marks that sit on the DNA itself. And those marks hold a record where a cell originated. They don't update. They do not tidy themselves up. Think of it this way. Gene activity is a job description. It tells you what somebody does all day long. Those chemical marks are a birth certificate. They tell you where that person came from. 2 people can hold the very same job. The birth certificates do not match. The researchers read the birth certificates. And that is when the swap became visible. They say so directly in the paper. This shift was not detectable from gene activity alone. It took the chemical record, the one that preserves a cell's lineage, to reveal it. Read only the job description, and you would have written all of this off as ordinary aging. Read the birth certificate, and you find out the staff was replaced. And that's the difference between watching a brain grow older and understanding what is actually happening inside of it. Citizens, I want to share with you what we see when the door closes. We have been in close to 2,000 homes. And when a family sits me down at their kitchen table, the first thing they tell us is almost never about memory. It's about time. They say we noticed something years ago, a word that took a beat too long to arrive, a conversation that got harder to follow once the room filled up, a route they had driven 1,000 times that suddenly needed thinking about. And then they say the part that stays with me. They say, we brought it up and we were told it was nothing, just age. Come back if it gets worse. Now, I'm not here to tell you that those families were right and somebody else was wrong. I was not in that exam room, but I have sat in enough kitchens to tell you this much. Those families were not imagining things. They were watching a window that science is only now building the tools to see. They weren't wrong. They were early. There's a world of difference between being told nothing is happening and being told we cannot see it yet. One of those closes the door and the other one leaves it open. I'll see you at the table. Now, I owe you the other half of this. And this is the part most channels skip because finding this striking is exactly the moment to oversell. And I'm not going to do that. So here's what this study does not say. It does not say that this handoff leads to Alzheimer's disease. It does not say that anywhere. The National Institute of Health, announcing the work, called it a potential mechanism and stated plainly that future studies will have to determine whether this transition contributes directly. Simple. That's not me hedging. That is the funding agency's own language. It also does not tell you how long before the symptoms or anything happens, because this was a single snapshot of tissue, one moment, frozen, not a film of a person moving through time. You cannot measure a head start from a photograph. And 40 donors is a real study, it's not a large one. Now, the last piece, and you are entitled to this one. One of the senior authors of this paper, Bing Ren, holds equity in 2 genomics companies. The work was funded by the National Institutes of Health. It stands on its own merit. That disclosure does not make the science wrong, but you should never have to go hunting through a footnote to find it. You should hear it from us in the same breath as the headline, not buried somewhere after the excitement. That is the deal we make with you at this desk. We will bring you the finding and we will bring you the size of it, because a number without its limits is not information, it's marketing. Now, if this is the kind of truth that you came here for, I want you to hit the subscribe button, because every week, every session, we come back right here with one job: your brain, your money, and your life. And we don't ask the industry for permission to tell you the truth. We don't care what they say or think. The subscribers here get every episode, every segment, every fact check first. So subscribe and stay in the nation. So let me say the uncomfortable part out loud. For decades, the working motto was that the aging brain simply runs down. And when the story is that decline is passive, a whole set of conclusions follows quietly along behind it. If nothing is happening, there's nothing to look for. So nobody looks. If there's nothing to look for, then there's nothing to fund. Not find, fund. So let's get funded. And if there's nothing to fund, then when a 58-year-old sits down in an exam room and says something feels different, there's already an answer sitting on the shelf. It's a short answer. It costs nothing. And it fits neatly inside the time the visit was given. Now hear me carefully, because I will not be misunderstood on this. That is not one doctor failing of one patient. The physician in that room was trained on the same map as everybody else. They were handed it. They didn't draw it. This is a system running on an old map and building its schedules, its billing codes, and its expectations right on top of it. The map just changed, and the system built on the old one does not update itself. Somebody has to make it. That is what a nation is for. And if the map just changed, so did what it means to take care of someone standing inside that window. So what do you actually do with this? And I want to be careful here, because this is where most channels reach for the checkout button. This study does not come with a supplement. It does not come with a protocol. It does not come with a 5-day reset. It is a map of when. It is not a prescription for what. And anybody who tells you otherwise this week is selling you something. But a map of when is not nothing. A map of when is a great deal. It says your 50s and your 60s are not a waiting room. They are not the quiet stretch before the real thing starts. They are the window, and for the first time, the science is pointed directly at it. So here's what change is starting today. Treat that decade as active, not as a countdown, not as the beginning of the end of anything. And if you bring something to a doctor, a word that will not come, a room that got harder to follow, and it gets waved away as just age, you are allowed to ask, what else could it be? You are allowed to ask, what would rule that out? You're allowed to ask that the conversation be written down. That is not being difficult. That is not being a burden. That is being a citizen in a room where somebody has to be. Because the science moved this July. The exam room has not moved yet. And the distance between those two things is where a lot of good years get lost. Citizens, before you go, if something in this hour, something in this session is landed for you, hit subscribe. We saved you a seat in the nation. And we're going to be right here next session, same place, same job. Your brain, your money, and your life. Because we don't age quietly, we age wealthily. And we do it better together. Take care of your brain, people.